Salut! La început de 2023 am declarat că împreună va fi cuvântul anului la Starea Nației. Am vorbit în cele mai multe dintre proiectele noastre despre aceste nevoi de conexiune, de siguranță, de colectivitate, de colaborare și despre cum viețile noastre, pe care mulți dintre noi, din păcate, suntem pur și simplu forțați să le trăim, nu ne mai îndeplinesc de multă vreme aceste nevoi psihologice atât de simple și atât de importante. Și nu a existat carte pe care să o menționez mai des când am vorbit despre toate acestea decât Legături pierdute, scrisă de Johann Hari. Hari vorbește despre cât de prost e construită infrastructura pe care ne bazăm astăzi, despre cum noi toți nu mai suntem conectați cu alți oameni, cu o muncă cu sens, cu valorile importante, cu natura. Avem nevoie să construim o infrastructură umană mai bună, una care să ne permită să formăm legături unii cu alții și mai ales să ne permită să le păstrăm, să nu le pierdem. Și avem nevoie să construim această infrastructură împreună, neapărat împreună. Pentru că dacă există o lecție mare care se desprinde din ideile lui Johann Hari, atunci asta este. Nu vom fi niciodată bine de unii singuri. Trebuie să ne reconectăm unii cu alții și să găsim sens în viețile noastre comune. Hari își încheie cartea cu un apel la acțiune adresat nouă, tuturor, de a ne strânge împreună și de a schimba cultura asta în care trăim și care ne provoacă anxietate și nefericire. Un bun punct de plecare pentru asta este conferința The Inner de la Cluj, unde Johann Hari va urca pe scenă pe 3 iunie ca să vorbească despre cum depășim anxietatea și depresia prin reconectare. Colega mea, Sorana Stănescu, a stat la povești cu Johann Hari în pregătirea acestui eveniment. Vă las să ascultați conversația lor, iar pentru restul poveștilor ne vedem la Cluj, la The Inner. Voi fi și eu acolo și abia aștept să ne conectăm unii cu alții și să lărgim tribul ăsta mare și frumos pe care l-am construit aici. Să vă fie bine!
Well, Johann, will you take me to Graceland one day? And I said, sure, the way you do with 9-year-olds, knowing next week you'll want to go to like the North Pole or whatever. And he said, no, you really swear one day you'll take me to Graceland? And I said, I absolutely swear. And I didn't think at that moment again for 10 years until so many things went wrong. He dropped out of school when he was 15. And by the time he was 19, he spent literally almost all his waking hours alternating between his iPhone, his iPad and his laptop. And his life was just this blur of WhatsApp, YouTube, pornography. And it was almost like he was kind of spinning at the speed of Snapchat, you know, where nothing still or serious could touch him. And one day we were sitting on my sofa just behind where I'm talking to you now. And all day I was trying to get a conversation going with him and I couldn't. And to be totally honest with you, I wasn't that much better, right? I was staring at my own face. And I was sitting there and feeling so despairing. And I suddenly remembered this moment all these years before. And I said to him, hey, let's go to Graceland. And he looked at me completely blankly. He didn't remember this thing these years before. I said, this is no way to live. Let's break this numbing routine. Let's go on a road trip all over the South of the United States. But you've got to promise me one thing. If we go, you'll leave your phone in the hotel during the day because there's no point going. You're going to be on your phone the whole time. And he took a beat and he really thought about it. He said, I want to do this. And I think it was 2 weeks later we took off from London to New Orleans, where we went first. A couple of weeks later we got to the gates of Graceland. And when you get to Graceland now, there's no, this is even before COVID, there's no human being to show you around. What happens is they hand you an iPad, you put in earbuds and the iPad shows you how it says left, go right. Every room you go in, there's an image of that room on the iPad in front of you, and the voice tells you a story about it. So what happens is everyone just kind of walks around Graceland staring at their iPads. And I'm walking around getting a little bit, I'm like, wow, everyone's really looking at this place. And got to the jungle room, this Elvis favourite room, and I'll never forget it, this Canadian couple next to us. And we were in, obviously, the room, that Elvis favourite room, and they were swiping back and forth, and my wife turned to her husband and said, "Honey, this is amazing, look. If you swipe left, you see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right." And I kind of laughed. I thought they were kidding. And they just stood there swiping back and forth. And I leaned forward and I said, "But hey, sir, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping you can do. It's called turning your head. Because we're in the jungle room. You don't have to look at it on the internet. It's all around you." They looked at me like I was completely insane and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat. Because from the moment we landed, he just couldn't stop. And I went up to him. I didn't think it's never a good idea with teenagers. I tried to grab the phone. And I said, "Look, I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing you'll miss out. You're not showing up at your own life." And he stormed off, understandably, and I walked around this day. I found him that night at the Heartbreak Hotel where we were up the street. And he was sitting there looking at his phone, and I went up to him, I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up, looking at Snapchat, but he said, "I know something's really wrong, and I don't know what it is." And that's when I realized I need to investigate really. I realized that we came away from this problem of distraction, but there was nowhere to escape to. This problem was everywhere. So I had to understand, how did it happen to us? Most importantly, how do we solve this problem?
How did this happening, this sad
sorry,
happening...
Sorry, I turned the volume down because of that noise. Hang on a sec. Yeah, sorry.
So how this sad happening with your godson inform your writing and your research?
Well, I think it made me think, I would say to anyone watching, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of. Whether it's starting a business, your parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever it is. That thing that you're proud of required a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. And when your ability to focus and pay attention breaks down, your ability to achieve your goals is diminished, your ability to solve your problems is diminished. So I was worried for him because I could see that if this problem continued, he would not be able to achieve all the things he should be able to achieve in his life. And I felt that for myself, that if my attention continued to get worse, I would be diminished. And I felt that for our whole culture. So I wanted to figure out, well, what's happening to us? So I ended up going on this really big journey all over the world, from Moscow to Miami to Melbourne, to interview over 200 of the leading experts on attention and focus. And what I learned is there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better, can make your attention worse. And loads of the factors that can make your attention worse have been hugely increasing in recent years. Some of those factors from our technology, but they actually go very widely. In the food we eat, the way our offices work, the way our schools work, a big, broad range of factors. Crucially, what I learned is once you understand what's happening because of these big factors, you realize it's not your fault. It's not just you. It's happening to almost everyone. It's happening because of these big structural reasons. Once we understand those reasons, we can begin to solve them. To some degree as individuals, to some degree as society.
So whose fault is it then?
Sorry, that one more time?
Whose fault is it then that our attention and focus are being stolen if it's not just us, up to us?
Yeah, so there's a big range of factors, from the food industry to the way our schools are organized. There's a huge array. But let's talk about one that I think, I'll give you an example of one of the causes that I think will be playing out for pretty much everyone today, and then we can think a little bit about who's responsible for that. So I went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to interview one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller. And he said to me, look, there's one thing you've got to understand more than anything else about the human brain. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is just a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain has not changed significantly in 40,000 years. It's not going to change on any time scale any of us are going to see. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion. The average teenager believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time, and they've been made to think that didn't come from them. And the rest of us are not far behind. We think we can follow many things at the same time. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller, scientists all over the world, including in Romania, get people into labs, and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time. And they monitor them. And what they discover is always the same. You can't do more than one thing at a time. What you do is you juggle very quickly. You alternate very quickly. Like, wait, what did you just ask me? What is this message on WhatsApp? What does it say on the TV over there? What's this text message? Wait, sorry, what are you asking me again? And it turns out that juggling comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. When you try and do more than one thing at a time, it turns out you do all the things you're trying to do much less competently. You make more mistakes, you remember less of what you do, you're much less creative. And I remember when I first learned that, thinking, okay, I get it. That's a small effect, right? It's a small effect. It's a really big effect. One study by Professor Michael Posner at the University of Oregon found that if you're interrupted by something as simple as a text message, it takes you, on average, 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus you had before you were interrupted. But most of us never get 23 minutes without being interrupted. So we're constantly operating at this lower level of intelligence, of creativity, memory, and understand why this is happening. That didn't just happen by accident. That happened by design, right? We were led to believe we could do things we cannot do.
So multitasking is
responsible for that, if you like, but it's important to understand that's not an idea that came from us, right? Even think about the term multitasking. Multitasking is a term that comes from computing. Computers can multitask. They've got more than one processor, right? We're not computers. We can't multitask. We're human beings, right? We can do things that machines can't, and there are things machines can do that we can't do.
A very interesting point that you make in the book is that if you've spent long enough being interrupted, at some point you will start interrupting yourself. And this self-sabotaging is just something I'd never thought about before. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is an insight that comes from Professor Gloria Mark at UC Irvine in the US, who's a brilliant scientist on these questions. And she talks about how exactly that point, if you get used to being interrupted all the time, if you expect to be, your whole consciousness will come to be like that. If you think the world comes in 60-second chunks and then you're interrupted, for a while, even when those interruptions are taken away, every 60 seconds you're going to be like switching subject, you're going to, in your own mind. It's important to understand why this happened to us and obviously what we can do about it, because as you know, I'm not interested in describing problems just for the sake of describing problems. For me, the reason to understand problems is so we can get to solutions. But let's think about why that happened and who's to blame, that really important question that you asked. So when it comes to this factor, and I stress there's 12 factors that I go through in my book, Style and Focus, but when it comes to this factor, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing the people who designed key aspects of the world in which we now live, because I wanted to understand what's going on. The first thing that struck me is how incredibly guilty they feel, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful man named Dr. James Williams who used to be at the heart of Google. And one day he was speaking at a tech conference where the audience were literally the people who design the stuff the kids are using today, right? And the stuff you're likely to use today. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we've created, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. And he felt just sick, right? So speaking to a lot of these people in Silicon Valley, wanted to understand, obviously, what happened to us, right? How does this machinery work? And they kept explaining it to me, and I kept thinking, well, it can't be that simple. And they kept kind of looking at me thinking, well, how did you think it worked? So they explained to me, if you open Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, any of the social media apps now, please don't, but if you did, those apps would begin to make money out of you immediately in two ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising. Okay, everyone knows how that works. The second way is much more important. Everything you do on these apps is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out who you are and what you like. So let's say that you've ever indicated on any of these apps that you like, including in your so-called private messages, by the way, that you like, I don't know, Donald Trump, Dolly Parton, and you've told your mother you just bought some nappies for your baby. Okay, going to figure out if you like Donald Trump, you're probably right-wing. If you like Dolly Parton, you like country music. If you bought some nappies, okay, that means that you got a baby. It knows tens of thousands of things like this about you. And it's learning that information, partly to sell that information to advertisers so they can target you. You know, all these companies have customer service departments. You can't phone them, I can't phone them. We're not the customer, right? The only people who can phone them are the advertisers. They are the customers.
The big business.
The product they sell to the real customer, the advertiser. So partly it's to sell that information to advertisers, but mainly it's to figure out what they can feed you to keep you scrolling, what they can put into your feed that will keep you going. Because the longer you scroll, every time you pick up the app and begin to scroll, they begin to make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make because the more ads you see. And every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. So all of this genius in Silicon Valley, when it's applied to social media, all this artificial intelligence, all these algorithms, is geared towards one thing and one thing only. Figuring out how do we get you to pick up your phone as often as possible and scroll as long as possible. How do we get kids to pick up their phones as often as possible and scroll as long as possible? That's it. That's all they do. Just like the head of KFC, all he cares about in his professional capacity is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. All they care about is maximizing user engagement, which is scrolling. The whole machinery is designed to do that. And one of the ways they do that is by making you think you can do more than one thing at a time. Don't just watch a TV show, live tweet it, for example, right? So you can see how the whole machinery is built around hacking and fracturing our attention. It's not because they're evil people, but it's because they want to make money.
And another way of getting our attention is not just by scrolling and advertising, but it's also providing us with content that is enraging, right? Because you talk about in your book about how we tend to stare at something negative much longer than we do at something positive or lovely. So that's how we end up actually on YouTube down a rabbit hole. Could you please elaborate on that and how YouTube and the algorithm works so that it keeps you there and provides you with negative content?
So glad you asked about this. It's so important. It's having a terrible effect on our attention. It's also having a terrible effect on our collective attention, our politics. I can explain why. So, like I say, the algorithms, all they care about, the whole machine is set up to keep you scrolling. It doesn't care what will make you scroll, right? All it cares about is that you keep scrolling so you keep seeing ads so they make money. So the machinery is set up, and it bumped into a truth about human psychology, a part of human psychology that's been known about for, 70 years now. It's called negativity bias. It's really simple. Like you say, you put it really well. Human beings will stare longer at things that make them angry and upset than we will at things that make us feel good. If you've ever seen a car accident on the highway, you know what I mean, right? You stared longer at the mangled car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street. This is a very deep part of human nature. 10-week-old babies stare longer at angry faces than smiling faces, right? It's one part of our psychology. Obviously, we've got other things as well. And that's always been there. But when that combines with algorithms that are figuring out what will keep you staring, it has a disastrous effect. So one way to understand it is picture two teenage girls who go to the same party and leave and go home on the same bus. And one of them does a video where they say, "That was such a great party. We danced all night K-pop. We had such fun. I loved it." And the other girl opens it, TikTok, and says, "Karen was a hoe at that party and her boyfriend's a prick," and just does an angry denunciation of everyone at the party. The algorithms are scanning for the kind of language you use. And they'll put that first video into a few people's feeds, the nice one. They'll put the second video to far more people's feeds. Because as you say, if it's enraging, it'll keep you scrolling. What do you mean Karen's a hoe? You're a hoe. You can see how it causes a fight. That keeps people scrolling, they're engaged longer. The nice video, you go, oh, that's nice, and you move on. The nasty video, you get angry, you engage, you come back. What has she said now? You can see it increases engagement. Or like you say, think about YouTube. We know, and there's partly because a very brave person who worked at YouTube called Guillaume Chasselot quit, leaked this information. You know, say you go to YouTube and you look up the Holocaust, right? And first you'll see a neutral video about the Holocaust, just explaining the facts. But then it will feed you, you know, when it recommends the next thing, it will feed you angrier, meaner, more hostile videos, until eventually quite quickly you'll be watching insane Holocaust denialist filth, right?
And that's actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but...
destroys, obliterates, humiliates. If you want your video to go viral, you use those words, right? Because aggression and humiliation are enraging, they keep people scrolling, they keep people looking for longer. So you can see, one of the things I'm writing about in Stolen Focus, obviously mainly I'm focusing on how our individual attention is being destroyed. But you can't separate that from the mechanisms that are harming our wider attention. It is not a coincidence that countries as different as Britain, Brazil, and Burma have all polarized in disastrous ways over the past 10 years. We can't listen to each other, we can't talk to each other, we scream at each other, and over time, you can't have a democracy if you can never compromise and you're constantly screaming and people are interacting for 3 hours a day. I mean, the average child is now using TikTok for 100 minutes a day, right? If you're plugged into a rage machine for 100 minutes a day, it is very hard to have a functioning democracy. And you can see it's corroding democracy all over, which is why to deal with these very practical.
So then what do we do about all this? I mean, are we so powerless that we're just victims of algorithms and the big tech and the smartest people in the world? Or is there something that we can do individually and or collectively?
Yeah, I think you've asked that question really in the most important way, I think. So I think for all of the 12 factors that I write about in Stolen Focus that are harming our attention, I think there's 2 levels at which we need to deal with them. I think of them as defense and offense. So there are loads of things that we can all do immediately to protect ourselves and our children from these factors that are harming our attention. And I go through dozens of things in the book that we can do, but I'll give you an example of one. Over there in the corner, I've got something called a K-safe. It's very simple. You can buy it online. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, you turn the dial at the top, and it'll lock your phone away from anything between 5 minutes and a whole day, right? I won't sit down to watch a film with my partner unless we both put our phones in the phone jail. I use the phone jail for 3 hours a day to do my writing. I won't have my friends around for dinner unless everyone agrees to imprison their phone.
So you actually call it a phone jail?
I call it that. They don't call it that. But yeah, you know, I explain to people, you know, the pleasures of having people pay attention to you when we come around for dinner are so much greater than the pleasures of whatever little update you're going to get from Instagram or whatever news alert you're going to get for the next couple of hours, right? And people get nervous, and I understand I got nervous, but I try to say to them, you know, it's okay, you're not President Zelensky, you don't need to give orders, you know, it's all right. The world can cope without you for 2 hours, you know. And when people begin to do it, you can see the pleasure that comes to them when they realize they're using their full mind again on just one thing. So there are loads of things like that I passionately recommend and urge people to do.
What else have you done? Because you also say digital detox is not the only solution. You can't only do it on your own, and it doesn't really work that way. But I know you've just gone off Twitter, actually, until your next book is out. What else have you done?
I'll give you an example. There's an app called Freedom that you can install on your computer, that you can install it on your phone and your laptop. And you can tell it, so say you were addicted to Instagram, you can tell it, just don't let me go on Instagram for the next 6 hours. You push the button, and if you go to Instagram, a little screen pops up saying, You're free. You can't go on it, right? Or you can program it. I have it programmed so it renews every day. So on my phone, I just permanently have social media blocked on my phone. Some of the year I allow myself to have it on my laptop. I'm working at the moment, and I don't think you can write a good book if you're on social media all the time. So I have it blocked on my. At the moment, I have it blocked on everything. So there's lots of things like that, and lots of things that are not related to tech. You can change the way you eat. There's all sorts of things you can do. But I want to be really honest with people, because I don't think most people who talk and communicate about tension are leveling with people. I am passionately in favour of these individual changes. They'll make a really significant difference to your life. On their own, they're not going to fully solve the problem. Because the truth is, we're not in this attention crisis because you screwed up with your habits or I screwed up with my habits. They're happening because of these big social changes. And the way I feel is, it's a bit like at the moment, someone is pouring powder that makes us itch over us all day. And then they're leaning forward at the end of the day and going, hey, buddy, you should learn how to meditate. Then you wouldn't be scratching all the time. And you want to go, screw you. I'll learn to meditate. That's really valuable. You need to stop pouring this powder on me, right? So we need to, in addition to defending ourselves and our children, we need to go on offense against the forces that are doing this to us. We need to take on the factors that are undermining our attention and focus. And I know that can sound very kind of grand and fancy and abstract, but I went to places that have begun to do it. I'll give you an example of one. In France, in 2018, they were having a huge crisis of what they called le burnout, which I don't think I need to translate. And the French government, under pressure from labour unions, they would never have done it if there wasn't pressure, set up a government inquiry to figure out why is everyone so burned out all the time. And they found one of the key reasons, which is that 40% of French workers felt they could never stop checking their phone or email the whole time they were away. Because their boss could message them at any time of the day or night, and if they didn't answer, they would be in trouble, right? So I can give them all the lovely self-help advice in the world about, buying one of these K-safes and all the dozens of other things that I talk about in the book, deal with these 12 factors. If your job requires you to be constantly on your phone, well, what good is that to you? Nothing, right? So the French government came up with a collective solution, again, because of the unions, because French workers organised and demanded it. Very simple solution that's had a very big effect. The French government introduced a new law giving every French worker something called the right to disconnect. Very simple. It says, A, every French worker needs to have their work hours clearly written down in their contract, and B, when work hours are over, you don't look at your phone, check your email. So when I was in Paris researching this, Rentokil, the pest control company, had just been fined €70,000 complaining that one of their workers didn't check his phone an hour after he left work. Now that's one example out of many of big collective solutions to these problems. Right? Maybe there's someone watching who's very powerful in their workplace, and they could go to their boss tomorrow and go, you know what, I'm not checking my email after 5 p.m. anymore. I doubt there's many people who can do that, right? You can't do that as an individual.
Yeah.
But collectively, we can do that. That's what the French did, right? As a result, there's been a big improvement in attention in France. So I think we need to think about big collective solutions to these big problems. It means regulating big tech. It means regulating the food industry. It means regulating how our workplaces work. It means changing how our children's schools work. A whole array of these factors. But I think we have to level with people that isn't right, but just only focusing on our individual behaviour won't get us all the way back to being able to focus in. But when we collectively fight, we absolutely can.
Well, one last question, Johann. Where do we start? I mean, the French example is a very good one. But if we were to try something here in Romania or in any other European country, let's say, where do we start? What do I go on Google and type in what? How to stop big tech? What do I do?
So at the end of the book, I give a list of organisations that are fighting and campaigning on these various different issues. And I think what I would recommend is to everyone, in a way, this might sound strange, but when you ask that question, what I think about is my grandmothers. So I'm 44 years old, and when my grandmothers, who I really, really loved, when they were the age I am now, one of them was a Swiss peasant woman living in a wooden hut on the side of a mountain, and the other one was a working-class Scottish woman living in a really poor situation. And my grandmothers, when they were the age I am now, were not allowed to have bank accounts in their own name because they were married women. They weren't allowed to work outside the home without the written permission of their husbands. It was legal for their husbands to rape them, as it was legal everywhere in the world for a man to rape his wife. And my Swiss grandmother wasn't even allowed to vote, right? And I think about my grandmothers and how much their lives were just distorted by sexism and misogyny, right? They never got to have the lives they should have had. They never got to use their talents to the full because women were just denied these opportunities, right? And if I could go back to 1944, to when my grandmothers were 44, and they said, where do we start? I wouldn't be so arrogant as to tell them where they start, right? The feminist movement, which still has a long way to go, but it's obviously we've made a staggering amount of progress, right? My niece is 18. Even the craziest right-winger wouldn't say my niece shouldn't be allowed to have a bank account, shouldn't be allowed to vote, it should be legal for a man to rape her. No, you would regard someone as insane if they said that now, right? So you think about the incredible progress we've made, although we still have further to go. Where did they have to start? They had to start everywhere. They had to start in their homes, they had to start in their schools, in their workplace, and at a big national political level. And I think it just depended on what each individual woman, where they wanted to start that fight. And I think this is a bit like that. It's not exactly the same, obviously. It depends where you want to start. You might want to start changing how your kids' school works. At the moment, the way our kids' schools work, if you wanted to ruin children's attention, you would do what we did, right? You would get them meaningless tests, garbage. Maybe where you want to start is with the food system. Maybe where you want to start is campaigning at a national political level. Maybe where you want to start is just in your home. I think we need to fight at all these levels. And I wouldn't want to say to someone, you should do this one thing, because the truth of this crisis is quite broad, and we need people to fight at every level. Now, we need to band together, and if there isn't a group banding together and fighting on the thing you care about, then start. Let me know. I'll promote it wherever I can. I think the first step is that we have to change our psychology. We need to stop being ourselves, right? We need to stop acting like this is you failed or I failed. There's something wrong with children. There's nothing wrong with you and there's nothing wrong with your children. There's something wrong with the way we're living. And we need to realize at the moment we're in a race, right? On the one side, you've got these 12 factors that are harming our attention and focus, which, if we don't act, are going to get worse. Paul Graham, the biggest investor in Silicon Valley, said the world is on course to be more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook. Now imagine the next version is TikTok, right? That's one side of the race. On the other side of the race, there's going to be a movement of all of us saying, no, don't get to do that to me. Don't get to do that to my brain. Don't get to do that to my children. Of course, we choose a life with plenty of technology, but we also choose a life. We can think deeply. We can read books for our children and play outside. If we want that, we can get there. I've seen the evidence about how we get there. We can collectively fight. But it requires us to realize we are not medieval peasants begging at the table of King Zuckerberg and King Musk for a few little crumbs of attention from their table. We are the free citizens of democracies, very hard-won democracies in the case of Romania, and we own our own minds. And together, we can take them back if we want to.
Well, thank you so much. And if I can wrap up your last complex answer, is that there is no right or wrong way or place to start fighting whatever we want changed. And we should also stop blaming ourselves. It's not just our fault that we keep scrolling and we can't put the phone away. Yes, there is stuff we can do. There are technical solutions, but they're not the only solution. So yeah, stop blaming ourselves and start fighting back is a key takeaway, I think, for our discussion.
You said it better than me. Thank you so much. These were really great questions, and I really appreciate how deeply you engage with the book. And thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you again for the interview, and I hope to see you in Cluj in June at the Inner Conference.
Woo, brilliant. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Johann. Speak soon.
Have a great day, and thanks to everyone there as well. Cheers.
You too.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.